The rain hammered against the windows of Miller's Diner as Sarah Chen wiped down the counter for the third time that evening. Her shift was supposed to end at 9, but the storm had kept most customers away, leaving her with nothing but the steady tick of the wall clock and the occasional rumble of thunder. At 26, Sarah had grown accustomed to these quiet nights at the diner, though they did little to ease her mounting financial worries. Her phone buzzed with another text from her landlord, Mr. Peterson. The message was brief but clear. Rent was due in 3 days and he wouldn't accept another excuse. Sarah's stomach nodded as she calculated her tips from the week. Even with her paycheck, she would still be $200 short. The medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment had drained every penny she could spare, and her second job at the grocery store barely covered the basics. Sarah glanced at the clock again. 8:45. She began stacking chairs on tables, preparing to close early, when she heard a gentle tapping on the glass door. Through the rain-streaked window, she could make out a figure hunched under what appeared to be a torn piece of cardboard. The person was soaked to the bone, shivering visibly in the harsh weather. Her manager, Tony, had left early, muttering something about his poker game. The diner's policy was strict about not serving customers after closing time, and they definitely weren't supposed to let homeless people inside. But something about the desperate way the figure pressed against the glass made Sarah's heart ache. She remembered her own mother's words from years past. Kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Sarah walked to the door and turned the lock. The figure looked up, revealing the weathered face of an elderly man with kind brown eyes that seemed to hold decades of stories. His gray beard was matted with rain, and his clothes were nothing more than layered rags held together by hope and determination. He couldn't have been taller than 5.5 feet, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that struck Sarah immediately. "I'm sorry to bother you, miss," the man said, his voice hoarse but polite. "I was wondering if you might have any leftover food. I can work for it, clean dishes or sweep. I'm not asking for charity." Sarah looked at the man's gentle expression and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Come in out of the rain," she said, stepping aside. "You'll catch pneumonia out there." The old man hesitated. "I don't want to cause trouble. I know places like this have rules about people like me. The only rule I care about right now is treating people with respect," Sarah replied, gesturing him inside. "I'm Sarah, what's your name?" "Henry," he said quietly, shuffling through the doorway. Water dripped from his clothes onto the checkered linoleum floor. "Henry Williams. I really appreciate this, Sarah. More than you know." Sarah led Henry to a booth near the back and handed him a clean towel from behind the counter. "Sit tight. I'll get you something hot to eat." In the kitchen, Sarah prepared a hearty meal from the day's leftovers: meatloaf with mashed potatoes, green beans, and a slice of apple pie that hadn't sold. She heated everything carefully, adding extra gravy and a dinner roll with butter. When she returned to Henry's table, she noticed he was sitting perfectly straight, his hands folded politely in his lap despite his obvious hunger. "This looks wonderful," Henry said as Sarah placed the steaming plate before him. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," Sarah said firmly. "It's on the house. We would have just thrown it away tomorrow morning anyway." Henry's eyes welled up with tears. "You don't understand. I haven't had a proper meal in 4 days. I've been walking for weeks looking for work, but nobody wants to hire someone who looks like me." He gestured to his ragged appearance. Sarah poured him a cup of hot coffee and sat across from him. "Everyone deserves to eat, Henry. We're all just trying to get by in this world." As Henry ate, he shared pieces of his story. He had been an engineer once, working for a major company until the recession hit. When his wife died of cancer 3 years ago, the medical bills had consumed their savings. He lost his house, then his car, and eventually found himself on the streets. Despite his circumstances, he spoke without bitterness, only a quiet sadness for the life he had lost. "I had a daughter once," Henry said softly, staring into his coffee cup. "She would be about your age now. We lost touch when things got bad. I was too proud to ask for help, and she was too hurt by my pride to offer it. I think about her every day." Sarah felt a familiar pain in her chest. Her own relationship with her father had been strained before his death 5 years earlier. "I'm sure she thinks about you too, Henry. Sometimes pride gets in the way of the people we love most." Henry finished his meal slowly, savoring every bite. When he was done, he insisted on washing his own dishes despite Sarah's protests. As she tallied the day's receipts, Henry dried plates and wiped down tables with a thoroughness that impressed her. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had once taken pride in his work. "You're hired," Sarah joked as Henry folded the dish towel neatly. Henry smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all evening. If only it were that simple. "But thank you, Sarah. This meal, this kindness, it means more than you could ever know. It reminds me that there are still good people in this world." The storm was beginning to subside as Sarah prepared to lock up. She packed a sandwich and some cookies for Henry to take with him, along with a thermos of coffee. When he protested that it was too much, she simply smiled and said, "Pay it forward someday." As they stood at the door, Henry turned to her with a serious expression. "Sarah, I want you to remember something. Kindness is never wasted. Even when it seems like the smallest gesture, it can change everything. You've changed something for me tonight." Sarah watched as Henry disappeared into the darkness, her heart heavy with the knowledge that he would spend another night on the streets. She had no idea that the homeless man she had just fed was about to set in motion a series of events that would transform her life in ways she could never imagine. 3 weeks passed since Sarah's encounter with Henry, and life continued its relentless march forward. The memory of the kind homeless man lingered in her thoughts, especially during her loneliest moments at the diner. She often wondered where he was sleeping and whether he had found another warm meal. The image of his grateful smile had become a source of comfort during her own difficult days. Sarah's financial situation had grown worse. Despite working double shifts at both the diner and the grocery store, she had fallen behind on rent. Mr. Peterson had served her with an eviction notice, giving her just 10 days to pay the outstanding balance or find somewhere else to live. Her mother's medical bills continued to arrive in the mail like clockwork, each envelope containing another reminder of how precarious their situation had become. On a particularly busy Friday evening, Sarah was rushing between tables when she noticed a well-dressed gentleman sitting alone in the corner booth. He wore an expensive navy suit and had silver hair neatly combed back. What caught her attention wasn't his polished appearance, but the way he kept glancing around the diner with an almost nostalgic expression. He seemed to be studying every detail, from the vintage jukebox to the faded photographs of local landmarks hanging on the walls. "Good evening," Sarah said, approaching his table with a menu. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man looked up with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Coffee would be perfect, thank you. Black, no sugar." His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Yet there was something gentle in his tone that reminded Sarah of someone, though she couldn't place who. As Sarah poured his coffee, the gentleman continued to observe the diner. "This place has been here a long time, hasn't it?" he asked. "About 40 years, Sarah replied. "My boss bought it from the original owner back in the 80s. It's kind of a local institution now." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Institutions like this are rare these days. Places where people can count on good food and honest service." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "I imagine you see all kinds of people come through those doors." Something in his tone suggested he was fishing for information, but Sarah couldn't understand why. "We do, truckers, families, business people, students, sometimes folks who are down on their luck." She thought again of Henry and his gentle dignity despite his circumstances. "And how do you treat those who are down on their luck?" the man asked, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The question caught Sarah off guard. It seemed oddly personal for casual conversation with a customer. "The same way I treat everyone else," she said simply. "With respect. Everyone has a story and everyone deserves kindness." A small smile played at the corners of the man's mouth. "That's a lovely philosophy. I imagine it's not always easy to live by, especially in a business like this." Sarah shrugged. "It's not about easy or hard. It's about doing what's right." The gentleman ordered the evening special and continued to make polite conversation throughout his meal. He asked about Sarah's background, her family, and her dreams. There was something about his questions that felt different from typical customer small talk. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully when she mentioned her mother's illness and her struggles to make ends meet. "You mentioned dreams," he said as Sarah refilled his coffee cup. "What would you do if money weren't an issue?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's a pretty big if, but I guess I'd go back to school. I was studying business management before my mom got sick. I had to drop out to work full time, but I always thought about maybe opening my own restaurant someday." Somewhere that serves good food at prices regular people can afford. The man leaned back in his booth, studying her face. A noble dream. The world needs more people who want to serve others rather than just themselves. When the man finished his meal, he left a $50 tip on a $20 check. Sarah chased after him as he headed toward the door. "Sir, I think you made a mistake with your tip," she called out. He turned back with that same mysterious smile. "No mistake at all. Consider it an investment in your dreams." Before Sarah could respond, he was gone, disappearing into the night like a well-dressed phantom. She stood at the window, watching his figure fade into the darkness, wondering who he was and why he had seemed so interested in her life. The next morning, Sarah's world turned upside down. She arrived at the diner to find Tony pacing frantically in the parking lot, clutching a manila envelope in his hands. "Sarah, thank God you're here," he said, his face pale with excitement and confusion. "You're not going to believe this. What's wrong?" Sarah asked, alarmed by his expression. Tony thrust the envelope toward her. "This was delivered an hour ago by some fancy lawyer. It's addressed to you, care of the diner. I didn't know whether to call you or the police." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written on expensive letterhead from Morrison, Burke & Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The letter was brief but stunning in its implications. "Dear Miss Chen," it read, "our client has instructed us to inform you that you have been selected as the recipient of a significant educational scholarship. The scholarship covers full tuition, books, and living expenses for a 4-year business degree at the university of your choice. Additionally, a separate fund has been established to cover any outstanding medical expenses for your mother's treatment. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details of this arrangement." Sarah read the letter 3 times before the words began to sink in. Tony was staring at her with wide eyes, clearly having read over her shoulder. "Sarah, what the hell is this about?" he whispered. "Who do you know with this kind of money?" Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. She had no wealthy relatives, no secret admirers with deep pockets. The only unusual thing that had happened recently was her conversation with the well-dressed stranger the night before. But that seemed impossible. How could one conversation with a customer lead to something like this? "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I'm going to find out." The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Sarah could barely concentrate on taking orders or serving customers. Her mind kept returning to the mysterious letter and the even more mysterious gentleman who had seemed so interested in her dreams. As closing time approached, she made a decision that would lead her deeper into a puzzle she was only beginning to understand. The law offices of Morrison, Burke & Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown skyscraper. Sarah felt out of place in her simple black dress and worn shoes as she stepped into the marble lobby. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany furniture and oil paintings that probably cost more than she made in a year. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s, greeted Sarah with professional courtesy and directed her to the elevator. Attorney Michael Morrison was a distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His office overlooked the city, with floor-to-ceiling windows that made Sarah feel like she was floating above the bustling streets below. Morrison gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming so promptly," Morrison said, settling into his chair. "I imagine you have many questions about the scholarship offer." "Just a few hundred," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Starting with who would do something like this for a complete stranger. Morrison smiled and opened a thick file folder. "My client wishes to remain anonymous for now, but I can tell you that he's a successful businessman who believes in investing in people of character. He was very impressed by your conversation the other evening." Sarah's heart skipped. "The man at the diner? The one in the navy suit?" "I cannot confirm or deny specific details about my client's activities," Morrison said carefully. "What I can tell you is that someone has established a trust fund in your name, worth approximately $200,000. The funds are designated specifically for your education and your mother's medical care." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the arms of her chair, struggling to process what she was hearing. $200,000? That's impossible. People don't just give away that kind of money to strangers. Morrison leaned forward, his expression sincere. "You'd be surprised, Miss Chen. Some people who have been blessed with success feel a responsibility to help others who show promise and character. My client believes you possess both qualities in abundance. But how could he possibly know that from one conversation? Sarah asked. We talked for maybe 30 minutes total. Sometimes 30 minutes is enough to see someone's true nature, Morrison replied, especially when that person doesn't know they're being observed or evaluated. According to my client, you treated him with genuine kindness and respect, not because you expected anything in return, but because that's who you are. Sarah thought back to that evening, trying to remember every detail of their conversation. The stranger had asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to her answers, but she had assumed it was just polite conversation. Now she wondered if every word had been some kind of test. There are conditions, of course, Morrison continued, pulling out a legal document. The scholarship money can only be used for education-related expenses at an accredited institution. You must maintain a minimum GPA of 3.5 and complete your degree within 6 years. The medical fund for your mother can be accessed immediately and will be administered through this office to ensure proper usage. Sarah stared at the contract, the legal language swimming before her eyes. What does your client want in return? Nobody gives away this kind of money without expecting something back. Morrison's smile was genuinely warm. He wants you to succeed, Miss Jen. And someday, when you're in a position to help others, he hopes you'll remember this moment and pay it forward. Pay it forward, Sarah repeated softly. The phrase triggered a memory that made her breath catch. Henry, the homeless man she had helped weeks ago, had used those exact words when she gave him the sandwich and coffee to take with him. Is there something wrong? Morrison asked, noticing her sudden change in expression. Sarah shook her head, though her mind was racing. Could there be a connection between Henry and this mysterious benefactor? It seemed impossible, but the coincidence was too strange to ignore. Mr. Morrison, can you tell me anything else about your client? His age, his background, anything? Morrison considered this carefully. I can tell you that he's a man who has experienced both great success and significant personal loss. He believes that kindness is the most important quality a person can possess, and he has dedicated a considerable portion of his wealth to helping people who demonstrate that quality. The description could fit 1 million people, but something about it reminded Sarah of Henry's gentle dignity and his stories about his lost daughter. She thought about the pain in his eyes when he spoke about the pride that had driven his family apart. Mr. Morrison, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to thank your client personally, how would they go about doing that? Morrison's expression became more guarded. My client values his privacy above all else. However, he did mention that he might be willing to meet with you under the right circumstances, once you've had time to consider his offer. Sarah looked down at the contract again. The scholarship would change everything. She could return to school, complete her degree, and pursue her dream of opening a restaurant. Her mother's medical bills would be paid, removing the crushing weight of debt that had dominated their lives for the past 2 years. It was everything she had hoped for and more than she had ever dared to dream. But questions continued to plague her mind. If this mysterious benefactor was truly the well-dressed man from the diner, how had he known so much about her life? And if he wasn't Henry, why did his message about paying it forward echo the homeless man's words so precisely? I need some time to think about this, Sarah said finally. Morrison nodded. Of course. This is a life-changing decision. Take all the time you need. The offer will remain open for 30 days. As Sarah stood to leave, Morrison handed her a business card. Miss Chen, can I give you some advice? Sometimes in life, we're presented with opportunities that seem too good to be true. The wise person learns to recognize the difference between a trap and a blessing. From everything I know about this situation, I believe you're looking at a genuine blessing. Sarah left the law office with her mind spinning. She walked through the downtown streets, barely noticing the crowds of people rushing past her. The contract felt heavy in her purse, laden with possibility and mystery in equal measure. That evening, she found herself back at the diner, staring out the window where she had last seen Henry disappearing into the night. Tony was counting the day's receipts, occasionally glancing at her with curiosity. She had told him about the meeting with the lawyer but hadn't shared the full details of the offer. You're going to take it, right? Tony asked as he locked the cash register. I mean, you'd be crazy not to. Sarah touched the contract in her purse. I think I need to find someone first. There are questions I need answered before I can make this decision. Tony shrugged. Suit yourself. But if someone wanted to give me 200 grand, I wouldn't be asking too many questions. As Sarah cleaned the last of the tables, she made a decision. She would spend the next few days searching for Henry. If he was somehow connected to this mysterious benefactor, she needed to know. And if he wasn't, she still wanted to find him to share her good news with the one person who would truly understand what this opportunity meant. What Sarah didn't know was that her search for Henry would lead her to discoveries that would shake her understanding of everything she thought she knew about that rainy night 3 weeks ago. Sarah spent the next 3 days searching for Henry in every corner of the city where homeless people might seek shelter. She visited the downtown Mission, the public library where people sometimes slept during the day, and the various parks and underpasses known to provide temporary refuge. She carried sandwiches and hot coffee, hoping to trade information for sustenance with others who might have seen the gentle old man with the gray beard. At the Riverside Mission, she spoke with Director Martha Collins, a weathered woman who had been helping the homeless for over 20 years. Martha listened carefully as Sarah described Henry, but shook her head when she finished. "Honey, I see hundreds of faces every month," Martha said kindly, without a last name or some other identifying information. "It's like looking for a needle in a haystack." The homeless community is larger than most people realize, and people move around constantly. Sarah's frustration grew with each dead end. She posted messages on social media, and even convinced Tony to let her put up a small notice in the diner window, asking for information about Henry Williams. But as the days passed without any leads, she began to wonder if she was chasing ghosts. On Thursday evening, as Sarah was finishing her shift at the grocery store, her phone rang. The caller ID showed Morrison, Burke & Associates. "Miss Chen, this is Michael Morrison," the lawyer's familiar voice said. "I have some interesting news. My client has agreed to meet with you tomorrow evening if you're available." Sarah's heart jumped. "Really, where?" "Miller's Diner, actually. He'll be there at 8 o'clock. He specified that you should bring the contract, signed or unsigned, depending on your decision." The choice of location struck Sarah as significant. If this mysterious benefactor was indeed the well-dressed man from before, returning to the diner suggested he had some special connection to the place. "Mr. Morrison, can you tell me anything else about him?" "Even just his name?" Morrison paused. "His name is Henry Williams, Miss Chen. I believe you've been looking for him." The phone slipped from Sarah's hand, clattering onto the grocery store floor. Other employees looked over with concern as Sarah bent to retrieve it, her hands shaking. "Miss Chen? Are you there?" "Henry Williams?" Sarah whispered. "The homeless man is Henry Williams? I think there may be some confusion about my client's circumstances," Morrison said carefully. "Perhaps tomorrow evening's meeting will clarify things." 8 o'clock, Miss Chen. He's very much looking forward to seeing you again." Sarah drove home in a daze, her mind struggling to process this revelation. How could the ragged homeless man she had fed 3 weeks ago be the same person offering her a fortune? It didn't make sense. Henry had been genuinely hungry, genuinely grateful for a simple meal. She had seen the desperation in his eyes, the worn clothes, the dignity of a man who had lost everything. That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of her encounters with both versions of Henry Williams. The homeless man had spoken about being an engineer, about losing his wife and daughter. The well-dressed stranger had asked thoughtful questions about her dreams and values. Could they really be the same person? Friday dragged by with agonizing slowness. Sarah called in sick to the grocery store, unable to concentrate on anything except the approaching meeting. She spent hours getting ready, changing clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that her mother had bought her for job interviews. She arrived at the diner an hour early, nervously wiping down already clean tables and checking the clock every few minutes. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the diner's parking lot. Sarah watched through the window as a figure emerged from the passenger side. Even at a distance, she recognized the silver hair and confident posture of the well-dressed stranger from weeks before. But as he walked closer to the diner's entrance, something about his movement seemed familiar in a different way. The man who entered Miller's Diner was impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit and silk tie. His hair was perfectly styled, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. But when Sarah looked into his eyes, she saw the same gentle brown eyes that had looked at her with such gratitude That rainy night 3 weeks ago. Hello, Sarah, Henry Williams said softly. Thank you for meeting with me. Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, her mind reeling. Henry, but how? You were homeless. You were hungry. I don't understand. Henry's expression was both sad and hopeful. May I sit down? I have a story to tell you, and I'm afraid it's rather complicated. With trembling hands, Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and joined Henry at the same booth where she had served him that first night. Up close, she could see that despite the expensive clothes and grooming, he was definitely the same man. The lines around his eyes, the shape of his hands, even the way he held his coffee cup. It was all unmistakably Henry. I owe you an explanation, Henry began, and an apology. What I told you that night was true, but it wasn't the complete truth. Sarah waited, her heart pounding. I am Henry Williams. I was an engineer, and I did lose my wife to cancer 3 years ago. But I wasn't homeless, Sarah. I'm the founder and CEO of Williams Engineering Solutions. Perhaps you've heard of it? Sarah had indeed heard of Williams Engineering Solutions. It was one of the largest engineering firms in the country, responsible for designing bridges, skyscrapers, and infrastructure projects around the world. The company's founder was reportedly worth billions of dollars. I don't understand, Sarah said weakly. Why were you dressed like that? Why did you pretend to be homeless? Henry's eyes filled with pain. Because for 3 weeks I was testing something. Testing myself, testing the world, testing whether anyone would show kindness to someone who appeared to have nothing to offer in return. He paused, gathering his thoughts. When my wife died, I discovered something terrible about myself and the people around me. Suddenly, everyone wanted something from me. Charities calling for donations, distant relatives appearing with investment opportunities, friends who had never shown much interest in my company suddenly wanting to discuss business partnerships. I realized I had no idea who genuinely cared about me as a person versus who saw me as a source of money. Sarah began to understand. So you decided to find out what people are really like when they think you have nothing? Henry nodded. I spent 3 weeks living on the streets. I wore clothes from thrift stores, I slept in shelters, I asked for help from dozens of people. Do you know how many offered me a meal or even a kind word? Sarah shook her head. 3 people, Sarah. In 3 weeks, 3 people showed genuine kindness to a man they believed had nothing to offer them. An elderly woman who gave me her lunch, a teenager who shared his umbrella during a rainstorm, and you. Henry reached across the table and gently touched Sarah's hand. You didn't just give me food, Sarah, you gave me hope. You treated me with dignity when I looked like I had none left. You listened to my story and responded with compassion instead of judgment. In that moment, you reminded me that good people still exist in this world. Tears were streaming down Sarah's face now. But the scholarship, the money for my mother's treatment, that's real? Every penny of it, Henry confirmed. Consider it a thank you gift from someone whose faith in humanity you restored. Sarah sat in stunned silence for several minutes, trying to absorb everything Henry had told her. The coffee grew cold in her hands as she processed the magnitude of what had happened. A simple act of kindness had connected her to one of the most powerful men in the country, and now her entire future hung in the balance. There's more to this story, Henry said gently, seeming to read her thoughts. The reason I chose to test people's kindness wasn't just philosophical curiosity. I'm dying, Sarah. The words hit her like a physical blow. What? Henry's expression remained calm, as if he had made peace with his fate long ago. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe a year if I'm lucky. The same disease that took my wife, though hers progressed much more quickly. Sarah felt tears welling up again. Henry, I'm so sorry. Is there anything that can be done? With your resources, surely there are experimental treatments, specialists. I've explored every option, Henry said with a sad smile. Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't always buy time. I've accepted that. What I couldn't accept was the thought of leaving this world without knowing whether there was still genuine goodness in it. He pulled out an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. This contains the signed scholarship agreement and the documentation for your mother's medical fund. But there's something else I'd like to discuss with you. Sarah stared at the envelope, overwhelmed by the generosity and the sadness of the situation. Henry, you've already done so much. I don't know how I could ever repay you. Actually, there is something you could do for me, Henry said. Something that would mean more to me than you could possibly imagine. Sarah nodded eagerly. Anything, Just name it. Henry's eyes grew distant, filled with a pain that went beyond his physical illness. I told you about my daughter that first night. Her name is Emily. She's 28 now, living in Seattle. We haven't spoken in 5 years. What happened between you two? Henry sighed deeply. Pride mostly. Mine and hers. When her mother was dying, Emily wanted to take time off from her job to help care for her. I told her not to sacrifice her career, that I could afford the best care money could buy. Emily saw that as me trying to solve everything with money instead of letting her be involved in her mother's final months. Sarah could hear the regret in his voice. She wanted to help, and you tried to protect her from the pain. Exactly. But Emily didn't see it that way. She saw it as me shutting her out, treating her like a child who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. We had a terrible fight 2 weeks before her mother died. Things were said that can't be taken back easily. Henry pulled out his phone and showed Sarah a photograph of a young woman with his same brown eyes and a warm smile. Emily had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and was wearing scrubs, suggesting she worked in healthcare. She's a nurse, Henry continued. She chose that profession because she wanted to help people, to make a difference in the world. In many ways, she's a lot like you, Sarah. She has the same instinct to care for others, the same strength of character. Sarah studied the photo, seeing the family resemblance and the kindness in Emily's expression. You want me to contact her, don't you? Henry nodded. I've tried calling, writing letters, even sending intermediaries. She won't speak to me. I think she believes I'm trying to buy my way back into her good graces, just like she thought I was trying to buy my way out of grief when her mother was dying. So what makes you think she'll listen to me? Because you're not connected to our family drama. You're just someone who showed kindness to a stranger. Maybe if she hears the story of what you did, how you treated me when you thought I had nothing, it might help her understand that I'm not the cold, money-obsessed man she thinks I am. Sarah felt the weight of the request. Henry was asking her to help heal a relationship that had been broken for years, to bridge a gap between a dying father and his estranged daughter. It was a huge responsibility. Henry, what if she doesn't want to reconcile? What if talking to me just makes things worse? Henry's expression was resigned but hopeful. Then at least I'll know I tried everything. But Sarah, I've spent 5 years living with the knowledge that my pride cost me precious time with my daughter. I can't bear the thought of dying with that rift still between us. Sarah thought about her own relationship with her parents, the regrets she still carried about her father's death. She knew how much she would give for one more conversation with him, one chance to say the things that had been left unsaid. I'll try, she said finally. I can't promise anything, but I'll try to reach out to her. Henry's relief was visible. Thank you. That means everything to me. They spent the next hour discussing the practical details of the scholarship and medical fund. Henry had thought of everything, from which universities Sarah might consider to ensuring her mother would have access to the best oncologists in the country. His generosity was overwhelming, but Sarah sensed that helping her gave him as much satisfaction as receiving help gave her. As they prepared to leave, Henry handed Sarah a business card with Emily's contact information. There's one more thing, he said. If Emily does agree to see me, I'd like you to be there for our first meeting. I think having you present might help keep the conversation focused on what's really important. Sarah agreed, though she felt nervous about inserting herself into such a personal family situation. As Henry walked her to her car, she realized how much her life had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning she had been a struggling waitress facing eviction. Tonight she was the scholarship recipient and unlikely messenger for one of the country's wealthiest men. Henry, she said as they reached her car, can I ask you something personal? Of course. During those 3 weeks on the streets when people ignored you or treated you badly, didn't you ever want to reveal who you really were? Didn't you want to show them they were making a mistake? Henry smiled sadly. Every day. But that would have defeated the purpose. The point wasn't to teach people lessons about judging others. The point was to find people who didn't need to learn that lesson because they already understood it instinctively. As Sarah drove home, she carried with her the weight of Henry's trust and the hope that she might be able to help heal a broken family. She had no idea that Emily's response to her phone call would set in motion events that would test everything she thought she knew about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family. Sarah stared at Emily's phone number for 3 days before finding the courage to make the call. She practiced what she would say dozens of times, but when Emily's voice finally answered, all her rehearsed words disappeared. "Hello, is this Emily Williams?" Sarah asked nervously. "Yes, who is this?" Emily's voice was cautious but not unfriendly. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm calling about your father." There was a long pause. "If my father sent you to call me, you can tell him I'm not interested in whatever he's selling this time." "He didn't send me," Sarah said quickly. "He doesn't even know I'm calling you. I met him under very different circumstances, and I think you should hear the story." Emily's tone softened slightly. "What kind of circumstances?" Sarah took a deep breath and began telling the story of the rainy night 3 weeks ago, describing the homeless man who had appeared at the diner's door. She spoke about Henry's hunger, his gratitude, his dignity despite his desperate situation. She described their conversation about his lost daughter and the pain in his eyes when he talked about pride destroying his family. "Wait," Emily interrupted. "You're saying my father was pretending to be homeless? That's ridiculous. My father wouldn't last 5 minutes on the streets." "That's what I thought too," Sarah said. "But I've met both versions of him now. The homeless man and the billionaire businessman. They're the same person, Emily. And the homeless version. He was real. His pain, his loneliness, his love for his daughter, all of it was real." Sarah continued with the story, explaining about the scholarship, the mysterious benefactor who turned out to be Henry, and his desperate desire to reconnect with his daughter before his illness claimed him. When Sarah finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "He's really dying?" 6 months to a year, according to his doctors." Emily was quiet for a long time. "I work in oncology," she said finally. "I see pancreatic cancer patients regularly. The prognosis is usually not good. He wants to see you, Emily. He's carrying so much regret about the way things ended between you two." "He should be carrying regret," Emily said, but her anger sounded forced now. "Do you know what it was like watching my mother die while my father hired an army of caregivers instead of letting me help? I wanted to spend time with her, to take care of her myself, but he made me feel like I was in the way." Sarah could hear the years of hurt in Emily's voice. "He thought he was protecting you. He didn't want you to sacrifice your career." "It wouldn't have been a sacrifice," Emily said fiercely. "It would have been love, but he couldn't understand the difference. Everything was about money and career advancement and doing what made practical sense. He couldn't see that sometimes the practical thing isn't the right thing. Maybe that's why he spent 3 weeks on the streets," Sarah suggested gently. "Maybe he needed to learn that lesson for himself." Emily was quiet again. "This whole story sounds insane. My father, one of the most powerful men in the country, begging for food from strangers. I have pictures," Sarah said, "from the security camera at the diner, if you want proof." "I don't need proof," Emily said slowly. "I need time to think. This is a lot to process." Sarah gave Emily her phone number and asked her to call when she was ready to talk more. 2 days later, Emily called back. "I'll meet with him," she said without preamble. "But only if you're there too. I want to hear this story again, and I want him to hear it from your perspective." Sarah arranged the meeting for the following Saturday at a quiet restaurant downtown. She arrived early and was surprised to find Emily already there, sitting at a corner table and looking nervous. Emily was smaller than she had appeared in the photo, with delicate features and her father's gentle eyes. She wore simple jeans and a sweater, and Sarah could see traces of Henry's expressions in her face. "Thank you for coming," Emily said as Sarah sat down. "I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to go through with this." "It's brave of you to be here," Sarah replied. "Your father is terrified that you'll leave without giving him a chance to explain." "I've been angry at him for 5 years," Emily said. "It's hard to let go of that much anger all at once." Henry arrived exactly on time, looking more nervous than Sarah had ever seen him. He wore a simple button-down shirt and khakis, having clearly made an effort to appear less intimidating than his usual business attire might suggest. When he saw Emily, his eyes filled with tears. "Emily," he said softly, stopping a few feet from the table. "Hello, Dad," Emily replied, her voice carefully neutral. Henry sat down cautiously as if he expected Emily to bolt at any moment. For several minutes they just looked at each other, 5 years of separation hanging heavy between them. Sarah told me about your experiment, Emily said finally. About you pretending to be homeless? Henry nodded. It wasn't entirely pretending. For 3 weeks I was homeless. I was hungry. I was cold. I was ignored by most people who looked at me. It gave me perspective I'd never had before. What kind of perspective? Henry glanced at Sarah, then back at his daughter. I learned the difference between having value and being valued. I spent my whole life thinking they were the same thing. I thought if I could provide financially for the people I loved, that was the same as showing them I loved them. Emily's expression remained guarded. And now you think differently? Now I understand that Sarah valued me as a human being when she thought I had nothing to offer her. She didn't feed me because she expected something in return. She fed me because I was hungry and she had food to share. Henry's voice broke slightly. I should have let you take care of your mother, Emily. Not because we needed the help, but because you needed to give that help. I was so focused on protecting you from pain that I forgot you had the right to choose that pain out of love. Emily's carefully maintained composure began to crack. I just wanted to be with her, Dad. I wanted to hold her hand and read to her and make her soup. I wanted to be her daughter, not just a visitor who dropped by between shifts. I know that now, Henry said. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was too proud and too afraid to see what you really needed from me. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with years of hurt and misunderstanding, slowly giving way to honest communication. Sarah mostly listened, occasionally sharing details about her interactions with Henry that helped illustrate his character. She watched as father and daughter began to rediscover each other, their love evident despite the pain they had both carried. As the evening ended, Emily reached across the table and took her father's hand. I've missed you, Dad, she said simply. Henry squeezed her hand tightly. I've missed you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know. 6 months later, Sarah stood in a hospital room watching Henry Williams take his final breaths. Emily held one of his hands while Sarah held the other. In those last months, Henry had seen Sarah graduate with her business degree and had been present when she signed the lease for her first restaurant. He had walked Emily down the aisle when she married her longtime boyfriend, and he had lived long enough to hold his first grandchild. Henry had also established a foundation in Sarah's name, dedicated to providing scholarships for young people who demonstrated exceptional kindness and character. Sarah became the foundation's first director, ensuring that Henry's belief in the power of human goodness would continue to change lives long after he was gone. As Henry's breathing slowed, he looked at Sarah with eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. Sarah squeezed his hand. Thank you for showing me that kindness always comes back to us, just not always in the way we expect. Henry Williams died peacefully that evening, surrounded by the love he had almost lost and the kindness that had saved him. His legacy lived on, not just in the millions of dollars he had donated to charity, but in the simple truth he had learned, from a waitress in a small diner, that our humanity is measured not by what we have, but by what we give when we think no one is watching. Years later, Sarah would tell this story to countless scholarship recipients, reminding them that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change not just one life, but many lives in ways we never imagine. And in the restaurant she eventually opened, there was always a free meal available for anyone who needed it, along with a simple sign that read, "Kindness served here. Pay it forward."